my dear students, this is Dr. Smita Nayak, Professor and HOD, Department of Pharmaceutics at Gallot Institute of Pharmacy, in conversation with you regarding the various drug regulatory agencies. In your syllabus of pharmaceutical jurisprudence, there is a brief but very important topic, that is Introduction to Drug Regulatory Agencies. As you are all aware by now that pharmaceutical jurisprudence is one of the most industrially relevant subject that you have taken up as a choice-based subject. It is that subject which is going to give you a foothold in the industry. It is that subject which correlates directly your knowledge of pharmacy with what happens in the industry. Remember, the pharmaceutical industry deals with medicines and drugs that directly impact the health and safety of the consumer, who is the patient. Hence, it is very necessary for us to know the various rules and regulations governing the pharmaceutical industry. So far, you have learnt about the different acts, rules and laws that are applicable to the pharmaceutical industry and those which regulate the pharmaceutical industry. In today's lecture, I am going to give you an overview of the regulatory bodies which are responsible for implementation of these acts and rules. In your syllabus, you are having a brief overview of the regulatory agencies of various countries including the United States, Europe, UK, Australia and Japan. In addition, your syllabus covers an introduction of US FDA, the European guidelines, ICH guidelines and WHO guidelines. All these have been compiled together in my today's presentation on drug regulatory agencies. As we proceed ahead with the topic of drug regulatory agencies of countries across the globe, I, Dr. Smita Nayak, am going to first give you a brief introduction and overview to the various regulatory agencies of India. The main bodies that are responsible for regulation of drugs in India are the CDSCO, that is Central Drug Standard Control Organization. It comes under the purview of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. In addition, the bodies that are responsible for regulation are ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, IPA, the Indian Pharmaceutical Association, DTAB, that is the Drug Technical Advisory Board, CDTL or Central Drug Testing Laboratory, IPC, that is the Indian Pharmacopoeial Commission, and NPPA, that is the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. So these are the various bodies that ensure the safety, toxicity, efficacy as well as the fair pricing of drugs and pharmaceuticals in India. Now let us move forward to the other regulatory countries across the globe. Coming to US. The main bodies that are responsible for regulation of drugs and pharmaceuticals in the United States of America are the US FDA, that is the Food and Drug Administration of the US. The logo for this is shown at the bottom of my slide. Then there is NIH, or the National Institutes of Health Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. These are the bodies that contribute to regulation of drugs and pharmaceuticals in the United States of America. So, in brief about US FDA, what is the US FDA? The FDA is an agency within the US Department of Health and Human Services. Its responsibilities extend to 50 of the states which come under the US, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam and the Virgin Islands, as well as American Samoa and other US territories and possessions. The Food and Drug Modernization Act states that FDA has four main roles. 1. To promote health by reviewing research and approving new products. 2. To ensure that food and drugs are safe and properly labeled. 3. To work with other nations to reduce the burden of regulation. And to cooperate with scientific experts and consumers to effectively carry out all the above obligations. So once again, the main role of the US FDA as defined under the Food and Drug Modernization Act is to promote health by reviewing research and approving new products, ensuring that the foods and drugs that are supplied are safe and properly labeled, to work with other countries, other nations to reduce the burden of regulation, and to cooperate with scientific experts and consumers in order to carry out their obligations and duties. US FDA is led by the Commissioner of Food and Drugs, who is appointed by the President of the country and is confirmed by the Senate. The FDA is responsible for protecting public health by ensuring that the foods are safe, wholesome, sanitary and properly labeled. So the US FDA plays an important role in assuring the safety of foods. Additionally, the FDA assures that human and veterinary drugs as well as vaccines and other biological products and medical devices intended for human use are safe and effective. Next, the FDA is responsible for protecting the public from electronic product radiation. Remember, more the electronic products that are used in the country, more is the radiation, and as we all know, radiation is harmful, and therefore it is the responsibility of the US FDA to ensure that radiation levels are at safe and non-toxic. Going further, the US FDA assures that cosmetics and dietary supplements are safe and properly labeled. So accordingly, it ensures that these products are tested for safety as well as labeling is as per the regulations. The US FDA regulates various tobacco products that are consumed in the country. US FDA advances public health by helping to speed up product innovations. Also, the body helps the public to get accurate science-based information that is necessary to use medicines, devices and foods safely to improve their health. Last but not the least, the US FDA is responsible for initiation of a recall where necessary, either that could be either due to product complaints or due to substandard quality of the product. You must have come across numerous examples of US FDA's active involvement in guarding the safety and overall health of its citizens. We next move to the drug regulatory agencies in Europe. The European Medicines Agency or EMA is a decentralized body of the European Union that is located in London. You can see the logo of EMA at the bottom of the slide. The mission of EMA is to foster scientific excellence in evaluation and supervision of medicines. Let us see what are the activities that EMA conducts. EMA provides an independent science-based recommendation on the quality, safety and efficacy of medicines. EMA applies efficient and transparent evaluation procedures to help bring new medicines to the market. EMA implements measures for continuously supervising the quality, safety and efficacy of authorized medicines. EMA provides scientific evidence to stimulate the development and improve the availability of innovative new medicines. Then, EMA recommends safe limits for residues of veterinary medicines that are used in food producing or domesticated animals. Publishes impartial and comprehensible information about medicines and their use. EMA develops best practices for medicines evaluation and supervision in Europe and contributes alongside the member states and the European Commission to the harmonization of regulatory standards at the international level. Thus, the regulatory bodies in other countries play an equally important role as the Indian regulatory bodies in regulating the medicines, medical devices and medical treatment such that the safety and efficacy of patients is assured and all laid down limits, specifications, rules, laws are complied with. So far, we have looked at the regulatory body in the United States, that is the US FDA mainly, which is responsible for implementation of the various regulations. EMA or the European Medicines Agency, that is responsible for implementation of guidelines all over Europe. Let us now move forward to drug regulatory agencies in Japan. In Japan, the regulatory body is the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, which is in charge of the improvement and promotion of social welfare, social security and public health. You can see the logo of the Drug Regulatory Agency of Japan. It consists of the ministry as well as affiliated institutions, councils, local branches and an external organization. Okay, so right now we are discussing the drug regulatory agencies that exist in Japan. The various bodies, institutions and branches come under the purview of the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, and this ministry is in charge of improvement and promotion of social welfare, social security and public health. What are the functions of this ministry? It looks after public hygiene, whether hygiene is properly maintained. It designs appropriate medical services for diseases and injuries. The ministry ensures safety of food, water and medicines. The ministry funds and promotes research into health science for the purpose of making technological advantages. Maternal and child health also come under the purview of MHLW. Additionally, job security is also assured by this ministry. So, continuing forward, MHLW also looks after employability and promotion of employment amongst its citizens. It looks into the employment of elderly people who need to work to meet their financial needs. It also looks into the employment of persons with disabilities. The MHLW is also responsible for management of the employment insurance system. MHLW looks into human resource development, a very important function. It is responsible for promotion of human resources development in a manner that it reacts to the changes in the industrial system and acts accordingly. MHLW encourages workers' skill development as their own initiative, and it also promotes development of skilled human resources that are necessary to support industrial progress. Thus, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare looks after the abilities of the people to work in various sectors. It promotes development of their skills, and it also looks into the medical and the health system of the citizens. Next, we move on to Australia and the Australian government and how it promotes the regulation of medicines and drugs. This is done under the aegis of the Department of Health, Therapeutic Goods Administration. Let us go forth and see what this is all about. TGA or the Therapeutic Goods Administration is the Australian regulatory authority for all therapeutic goods. That includes our sector, that is pharmaceuticals, blood products and tissues, as well as medical devices. It ensures access to new therapeutic goods for the population and protects public health through the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989. In matters of medical device safety, quality and performance, the TGA is advised by and assisted by the Advisory Committee on Medical Devices. This committee also oversees pre-market conformity assessment and post-market monitoring of medical devices. So, the Therapeutic Goods Administration TGA, which is the Australian Regulatory Authority, regulates the pharmaceuticals, blood products and tissues. I'm sure that is a chapter you've learned in your previous years, as well as medical devices. In matters of medical device regulation, they are assisted and advised by the Advisory Committee on Medical Devices. The objective of TGA is to provide a national framework for regulation of therapeutic goods in Australia to ensure the quality, safety and efficacy of medicines and to ensure that the quality, safety and performance of medical devices is satisfactory and up to the mark. Essentially, all therapeutic goods must be entered in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods before they can be supplied in Australia. So, the way the TGA works is to monitor the various pharmaceuticals, blood and blood products and medical devices. At the same time, ensure that these are first registered in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods before they are supplied to the consumer, the end consumers or the patients, and it is their duty and responsibility to provide a framework for regulation of all these therapeutic goods in such a manner that the quality, safety and efficacy of these medicines and therapeutic goods is assured. The TGA carries out an overall control over the entire system of therapeutic goods through 5 main processes. Let us see what these are. First is a pre-market evaluation and approval of registered products that are intended for supply in Australia. So these could be locally produced therapeutic goods or these could be imported therapeutic goods. First, a pre-market evaluation under understanding of the market, the need and the approval of goods to meet this need is very necessary and is carried out by TGA. Secondly, development, maintenance and monitoring of the system for listing of medicines. So the register has to be developed, maintained, monitored from time to time. Next, licensing, a very important activity. So licensing of manufacturers in accordance with all international standards has to be carried out and is done by TGA. Then post-market monitoring is very necessary to detect if there are any adverse events and to oversee that they are reported adequately, carrying out of surveillance activities and response to public inquiry. So this is another very important activity that is carried out by the TGA, that is post-market monitoring, which is carried out not only through reporting but through sampling, adverse event reporting, surveillance activities and quick responses to public inquiries. Lastly, the TGA plays an important role in assessing the quality of medicines that are meant for export. This is to ensure that the reputation of the pharmaceutical industry in Australia is maintained and uplifted. The TGA is supported in its work by a number of external expert advisory committees, which includes Australian Drug Evaluation Committee, which is responsible for monitoring and regulating prescription medicines, Adverse Drug Reactions Advisory Committee, which is responsible for reporting, monitoring the adverse drug reactions, and Medicine Evaluation Committee, which is responsible for regulation of OTC drugs or over-the-counter medicines. Complementary Medicines Evaluation Committee, which is responsible for regulation of complementary medicines or alternate medicines. Therapeutic Devices Evaluation Committee, which regulates the medical devices that are sold in the country or are exported. National Drugs and Poisons Scheduling Committee, which is responsible for monitoring of the drugs that are toxic, therapeutic and poisonous in nature, and the Therapeutic Goods Committee, TGC. So, in the previous 3 slides, we looked at the Therapeutic Goods Administration that is responsible for regulation of all therapeutic goods in Australia. Now we move on to UK. In UK, the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency, that is MHRA, the logo for which you can see at the top of the slide, regulates medicines, medical devices and blood components for transfusion in the UK. Let us see the role of MHRA. Before we go to the role, let us understand the aim of MHRA. MHRA aims to protect public health through regulation with acceptable benefit risk profiles for medicines as well as medical devices. It promotes public health by helping the people who use these products to understand the risks and weigh them against the benefits. MHRA improves public health by encouraging and facilitating developments in products that can benefit people. Thus, MHRA assesses the safety, quality and efficacy of medicines and authorizes their sale or supply in UK for human use. MHRA oversees the UK notified bodies that audit medical device manufacturers, and it carries out post-marketing surveillance and other systems for reporting, investigating and monitoring adverse reactions to medicines and adverse incidents that involve medical devices and taking any necessary action as required to safeguard public health through safety warnings, removing or restricting availability of products, or improving the existing designs. So, to recap, the MHRA is responsible for ensuring safety, quality and efficacy of the medications and authorizing the supply of only those medications that are safe and effective. They oversee the bodies that are responsible for auditing medical device suppliers, manufacturers, and they also responsible for post-marketing surveillance, that is once the drug is administered, the drug reaches the masses, what is the reporting that is carried out, investigating adverse reactions and complaints if any, and adverse incidents involving medical devices, and taking whatever action is necessary to safeguard public health. The MHRA operates a proactive compliance program for medical devices. It also operates a quality surveillance system to sample and test medicines and to address quality defects, monitor the safety and quality of imported unlicensed medicines, investigates internet sales, that is online pharmacy, as well as potential counterfeiting of medicines. The MHRA regulates clinical trials of new medicines as well as medical devices. Thus, you can see that all the regulatory bodies, whether it is in the US, Europe, UK, Australia or Japan, play very important role in ensuring that the therapeutic goods or the medicines or the medical devices that reach the patients are safe, effective, have a fair price, and if there are any complaints, adverse reactions, these are monitored, reported and acted upon. So these activities are common to all the regulatory agencies that we have seen so far. Continuing forward, the MHRA monitors and ensures compliance with statutory obligations, any laws, acts, rules that are laid down related to medicines and medical devices through physical inspection, taking enforcement action wherever necessary. MHRA promotes good practices for the safe use of medicines and medical devices. At the same time, MHRA manages the General Practice Research Database GPRD as well as British Pharmacopoeia and contributes to the development of performance standards for not only medicines but also medical devices. The MHRA offers scientific, technical and regulatory advice on medicines and medical devices. It provides to the public as well as the professional any and every authoritative information that is necessary to enable an informed dialogue on the various treatment choices that are available to both the patients as well as the doctors. So what exactly does the MHRA regulate? What comes under the purview of MHRA as far as medicines or pharmaceuticals are concerned is licensing of medicines, determination of safe medicines for children, inspection and laying down standards, import and export of pharmaceuticals, best practice guidance on labeling as well as packaging of medicines, and the safety of medicines. So all these are areas which are regulated by the MHRA and fall under the purview of the MHRA, and these are very critically looked into by the MHRA. The MHRA assesses applications for marketing of medicinal products. It assesses applications for undertaking clinical trials, inspects the manufacturer's premises and the wholesalers of medicines, undertakes post-marketing surveillance which includes pharmacovigilance, quality defect monitoring, sampling and testing of medicines as well as recall of products on the consumer complaints. MHRA issues certificates to companies which wish to export their medicines to countries that are outside the European Union. It enforces statutory requirements covering medicines control as well as GCP or good clinical practice guidelines. It publishes quality standards for drug substances by amending the British Pharmacopoeia from time to time. So with that, we have covered a brief overview of the various regulatory agencies that govern the safety and efficacy of medicines that reach the patients. Okay. So now, what are the guidelines that are followed by these regulatory bodies? This is what is the topic of discussion of the second half of my lecture. That is the various guidelines that are laid down by the countries and which are followed by their regulatory bodies. We start first with the guidelines that are laid down by US and are followed by the US FDA. These guidelines are called as Code of Federal Regulations or CFR in short. So what is this CFR? CFR is a codification of general rules and regulations, also known as administrative law, which is published in the FR, that is Federal Register, by the executive department and agencies of the federal government of United States. Thus, CFR is a code. It consists of general rules and regulations which are nothing but an administrative law published in the Federal Register and therefore legally binding on all those who are carrying out the businesses as per the register. There are various sections of CFR, of which Title 21 is reserved for rules of the FDA. So the US FDA follows rules that are laid down in the CFR Title 21. Let us see in brief what are these rules. 21 CFR applicable to drugs and foods and drugs was received from the Government Printing Office, that is GPO, and contains the most recently revised revision. Parts 1 to 1499 consists of different types of rules and regulations related to foods, drugs, cosmetics as well as medical devices and several other allied components. To give you a brief example of what are the different parts in 21 CFR. 21 CFR Part 11 deals with procedures for electronic submission and electronic signature. So it is applicable across a wide range of businesses. 21 CFR Part 50 is related to protection of human subjects. 21 CFR Part 54 deals with financial disclosure by clinical investigators. So where clinical trials are ongoing or need to be started, they have to comply with the regulations that are laid down in 21 CFR Part 54. 21 CFR Part 56 lays down the rules and regulations pertaining to the Institutional Review Board. 21 CFR Part 101 deals with labeling of foods for marketing purposes. 21 CFR Part 104 deals with the nutritional quality guidelines for foods. So anyone who is into manufacturing of foods needs to comply with these guidelines. 21 CFR Part 106 deals with infant formula for quality control procedures. 21 CFR Part 110 lays down the CGMP practices in manufacturing, packing or holding human food. So as you can see, all these parts of 21 CFR are mostly dealing with requirements and regulations related to foods or nutrients or nutraceuticals. The Code of Federal Regulations lays down rules, regulations and practices to be implemented in various industries other than pharmaceuticals, foods, cosmetics, etc. Right now we are looking at the pharmaceutical, foods and cosmetics industry, which follows the guidelines as laid down in 21 CFR. 21 CFR is divided into several parts, out of which the two parts that are listed on the current slide are very, very important as far as the pharmaceutical domain is considered. This is because 21 CFR Part 2 10 lays down guidelines for implementation of CGMP practices in manufacturing, packaging or holding of drugs. The guidelines laid down here are very general, based on which the pharmaceutical industry has to develop its own practices in CGMP. 21 CFR Part 211 lays down the CGMP practices, or rather recommendations for finished products or finished pharmaceuticals. Going ahead, 21 CFR Part 225 lays down CGMP practices for medicated feeds for animals. 21 CFR Part 312 lays down guidelines for an investigational new drug application. 21 CFR Part 314 gives the guidelines for application for FDA approval to market a new drug. Whereas 21 CFR Parts 600 to 800 list the guidelines that are necessary for marketing of biological products. Okay, so like I told you, 21 CFR Part 210 and 211 are very important as far as CGMP in the pharmaceutical industry is concerned. So note once again that 21 CFR Part 210 lays down guidelines for CGMP practice in manufacturing, packing or holding of drugs, whereas 21 CFR Part 211 gives guidelines for implementation of CGMP practice for finished products or finished pharmaceuticals. So, what are the contents of 21 CFR 210? 21 CFR 210 is a very general guideline which gives you the status of CGMP regulation. It gives you updates on CGMP. It indicates the applicability of these CGMP regulations in pharmaceutical industry, and it gives a host of definitions that help us to understand the various terminologies better. 21 CFR 211 is much broader in scope and gives a much better knowledge, information and applicability of CGMP. There are various subparts under 21 CFR 211 where subpart A defines the scope of this CFR. Subpart B gives guidelines regarding organization and personnel. I have just listed down some of the points that are covered under subpart B. For example, 21 CFR 211 subpart B point 22 states the responsibility of quality control unit. One subpart states the necessary qualification of personnel to be employed by the pharmaceutical industry. Subpart .28 defines the responsibility of various personnel working in the organization. Subpart 34 gives the importance of consultants and the significance and when and where they should be employed. 21 CFR 211 subpart C defines the requirements of buildings and facilities for carrying out any activities for pharmaceutical purposes. For example, point 42 defines the design and construction features of the entire building. Subpart C point 44 defines the level of lighting that is required and is adequate to carry out various operational activities. C point 46 defines the requirements for ventilation, air filtration, air heating, air cooling, all of which are important criteria for efficient production of quality medicines. C point 48 defines the necessity for adequate plumbing and disposal of sewage and waste. Subpoint 52 defines the necessity need of sanitation, washing, toilet facilities and how they should be maintained and how many are required, etc. Subpoint 0.56 defines the sanitization procedures that are necessary to ensure low microbial count as well as the cleanliness. Subpoint 58 defines the need for maintenance of the premises, the machinery, the equipment, the processes and how and what are the steps that need to be taken for maintenance of the entire infrastructure necessary for carrying out pharmaceutical activities. 21 CFR 211 Subpart D focuses on equipments that are used in the manufacturing, testing, packing of these pharmaceutical products. So subpart 63 defines equipment design, size and location and how this needs to be planned, executed and implemented. Subpart 65 discusses the construction, materials, design of equipments. Subpart 67 lists the procedures and steps needed to carry out cleaning of the equipment as well as its maintenance such that the products that are manufactured, tested are of the highest quality. Subpart 68 defines the automatic, mechanical and electronic equipment that should be present in the premises, should be functional and should be sufficient to carry out all the desired activities. There is one subpart dedicated entirely to filtration equipment and filters. So you can see the depth to which CFR, that is specifically CFR 21 CFR 211 goes in defining the layout and giving a broad outline of the necessary infrastructure to carry out any activities that are related to pharmaceutical products. Further, subpart E deals with guidelines for control of the components. These components could be raw materials, actives, packaging materials, drug product containers as well as closures. So subpart 80 defines the general requirement for controls. Subpart 82 defines the procedure that should be used for receipt and storage of untested components. Subpart 84 gives guidelines for testing of such components and their approval or rejection. Subpart 86 defines the procedure to be used for use of approved components on the pharmaceutical lines, manufacturing or packaging. Subpart 87 gives the guidelines that deal with retesting of approved components where necessary. Subpart 89 gives guidelines for disposal of rejected components or their reworking. Subpart 94 deals with packaging, all packaging material, that is the primary packaging material, secondary packaging material or the tertiary packaging material including closures. Subpart F of 21 CFR 211 lays down guidelines for production control and process control. So let us see what this is. It talks of guidelines wherein written how to write procedures and how to note and record deviations from this procedure. It talks of charging of components, that is the manner in which or the procedure that is followed for addition of the different raw materials and actives into the actual batch. It gives guidelines for accurate calculation of yield, which is nothing but what is the amount of material that has gone in, what is the amount of finished product coming out, and how to reconcile both these. It talks of equipment identification in order to identify used equipment, unclean equipment, equipment ready for use from each other. The guidelines also state the procedure to be followed for sampling and testing of in-process drug product. Subpart 111 defines the time limitations on production and says that the production activity should be carried out within a particular period of time and the time should not be exceeded. Subsection 113 consists of guidelines that deal with microbial contamination and its possible sources as well as ways to control the same. Subsection 115 talks of reprocessing or reworking. So whenever there is some material, let us say granules which are very fine and therefore but they are of good quality, they need not be wasted, they need not be discarded, they need to be kept and added to the subsequent batches. Thus, you can see that 21 CFR 211 various subparts define individual activities that are carried out in the entire organization in depth. At the same time, these are very general guidelines which will tell you what is to be done. It gives recommendations for doing a particular activity, but how to do the activity and what are the different steps that you need to follow have to be decided upon by the pharmaceutical manufacturers themselves. So all these subparts of 21 CFR 211 are general guidelines and recommendations and not procedures. Next, subpart G deals with packaging and labeling control. This is a very important area for defining and assuring the quality of the products, because a product formulation by itself may be very good, but if it is packaged in a container that cannot protect it from moisture or humidity or light, then it is going to degrade. Also, if the label that is present on the container does not contain the necessary legal information or necessary information for storage and usage, this can also lead to wrong usage of the drug or degradation of the drug or contamination of the drug. Therefore, there is an entire subpart that deals with packaging and labeling control. Subsection 122 talks of examination of the packaging material, visual examination of the packaging material and laying down its usage criteria, which material is to be used for which product. There has to be a procedure for issue of labels to the packaging department, because if these labels are misused, this can go out into the market and a lot of spurious misbranded drugs would be available in the market. Hence, there is an entire subsection dedicated to issuing labels. There is a subsection that deals with the packaging and labeling operation, that is on the packaging machine and labeling machine. 21 CFR 211 determines the fact that tamper evident packaging is very necessary. What is tamper evident packaging? Tamper evident packaging is one which, if it has been tampered with, if someone plays mischief and opens the container and then tries to sell it, the end buyer is able to detect that this container has been tampered with. And such tamper evident packaging is very necessary for those products that are sold over the counter. Hence, subsection 132 gives guidelines for development of tamper evident packaging for OTC products. Subsection 134 gives the guidelines for inspection of such packed drug products. So even after the formulation is packed in a container and it is labeled, it still needs to be evaluated and inspected visually to ensure that the wrong product has not gone in the wrong container or the wrong label is not affixed on the wrong product. Section 137 lays down guidelines on determination of shelf life or expiry date for the finished product. Subpart H deals with holding and distribution of such goods that have been manufactured, packed. So where will these goods that are manufactured and packed remain until they are sold? So subsection 142 discusses the warehousing procedure, that is the storage of such finished products, and subsection 150 discusses the distribution procedure and lays down guidelines, the broad guidelines and recommendations for the distribution of such drugs from the warehouse further down to the retailer. 21 CFR 211 subpart I deals with the testing of such finished products at the laboratory level. So subsection 160 has laid down the general requirements for testing laboratories. Subsection 165 has laid down the guidelines for testing of these finished products and their release for distribution. Subsection 166 lays down guidelines and recommendations on how to carry out stability testing of such pharmaceutical products. If there are any special testing requirements, for example, sterile products need to be tested for sterility and pyrogenicity, or you have topical products to be tested for skin irritation, then special testing requirements are given as recommendations in subsection 167 of subpart I of 21 CFR 211. Subsection 170 discusses the need for keeping some reserve samples from each and every manufactured batch. The reason for this we will discuss later on. Subsection 173 discusses the guidelines that are needed for housing of, breeding of and testing of products in laboratory animals. Subpart J of 21 CFR 211 deals with the various records and reports and documents that need to be maintained for each and every batch of pharmaceutical formulation that has been manufactured. There are various sections under Subpart J. Section 180 deals with the general requirements. Section 182 discusses the documentation of equipment cleaning and usage log. Whenever any equipment is used for manufacture of the formulation or packing of the formulation, once the next formulation is to be manufactured, that in the same equipment, the equipment should be cleaned and it should be sanitized. There should be adequate records of cleaning of the equipment, and there should be logbooks in which the various details of usage, cleaning, sanitization are recorded. Subsection 184 deals with components that go into the formulation, whether it is raw materials, water or actives, the packaging materials, that is product container, closure and label, and the records of all these. So which batch of API has gone into the production, or which batch of raw material has gone, or which is the batch of packaging material that has been used for a particular product, all these records need to be documented and produced whenever necessary. Section 186 discusses and lays down guidelines for master production records as well as control records. Section 188 deals with batch production records and control records. Section 192 deals with review of such production records. Section 194 discusses the need for and has laid down the guidelines for preparing all records of all activities that are carried out for testing of the pharmaceutical product in the testing laboratories. Section 196 lays down the guidelines on documentation to be carried out to show the distribution of drug right from the dispensing of raw material up to the warehouse stage. Lastly, Section 198 lays down the needs for and gives recommendations whenever there are any complaints that are received by the company from the patient or from the chemist. These also need to be documented and complaint files need to be generated. So section 198 deals with the preparation of documentation of all complaints in the form of complaint files, which can be produced later on whenever the regulatory agencies so demand. Subpart K deals with returned and salvaged drug product. So because of expiry or any other reason, some of the formulation that has gone into the market may be returned back to the manufacturer. How to deal with such returned goods? What is the procedure for salvaging them, that is recovering them or destroying them, is laid down in the guidelines 21 CFR 211 subpart K. Here the subsection 204 lays down guidelines for dealing with and documentation of returned drug products, and section 208 lays down guidelines and recommendations on how to salvage the returned drug product if possible. So with that we have completed the various guidelines that were laid down in 21 CFR relevant to pharmaceuticals, foods and cosmetics and implemented by the US FDA. Now as we move forward to the next topic, that is ICH guidelines, we need to first understand what is this ICH before we proceed to the guidelines. These ICH guidelines are very vast and they deal with the stability testing of the various formulations. What is stability testing? Whenever you manufacture any formulation and you market it, you need to give a shelf life. Now this shelf life is based on the assumption that if the shelf life of a product is 2 years, then whatever were the physical and chemical specifications of the product at the beginning, that is immediately after manufacture, the same are retained till the end of 2 years, which is the shelf life of the product. And how do you ensure that the physical and chemical attributes remain unchanged over the entire shelf life of the product? Is by carrying out what are called as stability studies. Right? You must have heard this terminology, stability studies. Therefore, stability studies give us an assurance of retention of the physical and chemical characteristics of the formulation throughout its shelf life. What stability studies need to be done in case of tablet, in case of an aerosol, in case of a sterile product? So what are the different stability studies that need to be carried out on different formulations, and what are the guidelines that are laid down by different countries? Each manufacturer and each of each country and different countries were having different guidelines. There was no uniformity in the stability studies that were being carried out. While 5 to 6 decades back this was all right, but over a period of time when countries started exporting their pharmaceutical formulations to each other, and it was found that the stability study carried out in one country was insufficient to guarantee the stability of that particular formulation in another country. This was because of the geographical differences in the countries, the difference in the weather, the minimum temperature, maximum temperature, difference in the storage conditions and the different countries, etc. So a need was felt to lay down uniform guidelines that could be taken up by countries across the globe, and stability study to be carried out on the basis of these guidelines, and such data that is generated is acceptable in all the countries. Therefore, there was need for uniform guidelines, and this came up in the form of ICH guidelines. So this is a brief introduction to ICH guidelines. Let us now go further and understand what these guidelines are. Like I told you, the ICH guidelines are very vast and there is voluminous material that is available on these guidelines. However, going through the entire gamut of ICH is not in the purview of this chapter, which is supposed to be a duration of only 2 hours. Therefore, what I am going to do is give you a very brief skeletal review of ICH guidelines. All those who are interested, and this is a very interesting topic, should go through the ICH guidelines, which are freely available on the net. Also, if you're interested, you should go forward and do MPharm in quality assurance to understand more about the quality aspects of all these regulatory agencies as well as the various guidelines. So coming back to ICH guidelines, let me read what is written on the slide. The International Conference on Harmonization, that is ICH, of technical requirements for registration of pharmaceuticals for human use, that is the abbreviation is ICH. Okay, so again it is ICH, International Conference on Harmonization, but of what? Technical requirements, so testing for stability. Why? For registration of pharmaceuticals. Like I told you, when countries want to export to each other, or when country wants to import from another country, then they need uniform guidelines, and that is what this ICH is all about. So ICH is a unique project that brings together the regulatory authorities of Europe, Japan and the US, as well as experts from the pharmaceutical industry in the 3 regions to discuss scientific and technical aspects of product registration. Thus, the ICH guidelines were formulated by pharmaceutical experts from Europe, Japan and US, and they put down certain requirements for carrying out the stability testing of drugs, and the data so generated as per ICH guidelines is acceptable across the entire world, especially those countries which are members of this ICH guidelines. The ICH guidelines are broadly categorized into 4 different categories, that is Q or quality, S stands for safety, E stands for efficacy, and M refers to various miscellaneous guidelines that are necessary. So all guidelines that fall under the quality category deal with stability testing of the pharmaceutical formulations, impurity testing of pharmaceutical formulations, and good manufacturing practices or GMP. Those guidelines which are responsible for ensuring the safety of the various formulations lay down the procedures and guidelines as well as recommendations for carrying out testing of the formulation for carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, and reproductive toxicity. Guidelines dealing with efficacy of the formulations are those where recommendations for carrying out clinical trials of such pharmaceutical formulations and pharmacogenomic studies of such formulations are laid down. There are several other uncategorized guidelines that are necessary for safe and effective formulations, and these are categorized under the miscellaneous category. So you have certain guidelines referring to the various document software as well as documentation CTD that needs to be done for such pharmaceutical formulations, as well as electronic standards that need to be laid down. For the purpose of our study, the quality guidelines dealing with stability, impurity and GMP are more important, and that is what we will see in our next slide. So the quality ICH guidelines with respect to quality fall under Q1. Okay, and there are various subcategories of Q1. For example, you can see the latest guidelines of Q1 are listed here, and only their titles are put forth. Okay, a detailed discussion of these various guidelines is out of the scope of this chapter. Quality guideline, ICH guideline Q1A deals with stability testing in new drugs and products. Q1B deals with photo stability testing of such new drugs and products. Q1C deals with stability testing of new dosage forms, that is novel dosage forms. Q1D discusses the bracketing and matrixing design for stability testing of drug substances and drug products. Q1E discusses the evaluation of stability data. Q1F lays down the guidelines for stability data package for registration in climatic zones 3 and 4. Now, what these climatic zones 3 and 4 are is we will discuss as we go ahead. Quality guideline Q2A gives the definitions and terminologies for that are used in analytical method validation. Q2B discusses the methodology of analytical validation. Guidance Q3A lays down the recommendations for impurity testing in new drug substances. Guidance 3B discusses impurities in dosage forms. And guidance 3C gives the recommendations for evaluation and testing of residual solvents in various formulations. So as you can see, all these guidelines are laid down to determine the stability of the new drug substances as well as impurity determination. All these are ICH guidelines which come under the category of quality. ICH guidelines Q4 discusses pharmacopoeial harmonization. Q5A discusses viral safety evaluation. Guidance Q5B lays down recommendations for evaluation of genetic stability of biotechnological products. Q5C discusses the stability of biotechnological products. Q5D discusses cell substrates that can be used. Q6A lays down specifications, test procedures and acceptance criteria for new drug substances and products. Criteria Q7A gives guidelines for following GMP for APIs. Q8 discusses pharmaceutical research product development. Q9 guideline discusses the quality risk management, while Q10 discusses the pharmaceutical quality. So these are the titles of the various guidances that fall under category Q of ICH guidelines. Now, knowing all these guidelines is one aspect of ICH. Other aspect is what is the actual stability testing that you need to do. How do we carry out stability testing under ICH guidelines? And that is what we are going to look at next. Now, before we move on to the different aspects of stability guidelines, stability testing that is to be carried out under the ICH guidelines, just think of this, that is there one common stability protocol that can be followed and the data is acceptable to all countries across the world? No. This is precisely because there is vast difference in the climatic regions across the different zones of the world. Hence, for the purpose of acceptability of data, the whole world has been divided into 4 zones depending on the different environmental conditions that exist in these zones and which the pharmaceutical products are likely to be subjected during their storage. So you can imagine that if an Indian pharmaceutical firm were to manufacture a particular formulation and it were to export it to various countries, right from New Zealand to Australia to UK to the US to the Arctic region, then is one set of data enough to assure the stability of that particular formulation in these different countries? No, it is not. Therefore, it needs to generate different sets of data by subjecting the formulation to different conditions, and that is what we are going to see as we push ahead. These conditions have been derived on the basis of mean annual temperature and relative humidity data in these regions. So this is a very interesting concept of dividing the entire world into different climatic zones, defining those climatic zones in terms of temperature and relative humidity, carrying out stability testing at those particular temperatures and humidity, and submitting that particular data to a country that lies in that zone, and that country has to accept this because the entire procedure is being carried out as per the ICH guidelines. I want all of you all to go through ICH guidelines which are available on the net. See the 4 different zones into which the world is divided. Determine the countries and the zones that they fall into. Especially look up the zone that India comes under. Now, as a sample prototype, I have taken the stability protocol of one of the zones and put it here as an example for you. Whenever you do the stability testing of any formulation, the formulation has to be kept at different storage conditions and it has to be evaluated periodically. Let us try to understand what this table says. On the left hand side, the very first column gives you the different types of studies that need to be carried out for the stability testing of formulations. The first is what is called as the long-term stability study, or the stability study carried out at ambient temperatures. The storage condition at which the samples are stored is given in the center column. That is, the samples are stored at a temperature of 25 degrees centigrade plus minus 2 degrees centigrade and 60% RH or relative humidity plus minus 5%. Now, what does this storage condition indicate? This is the condition at which the samples of formulation are stored and the temperature is 25 degrees centigrade with humidity of 60% RH. Now, why these two conditions is because both temperature as well as humidity play an important role in determining the extent of degradation or the degree of stability of the formulation. As you know, many of the formulations are packed in containers or packaging materials which allow water vapor, moisture to permeate through. Hence, it is both temperature and humidity that is considered as the storage condition. Thus, whenever a long-term stability study is carried out on any pharmaceutical formulation, the samples of the formulation are stored at 25 degrees centigrade and 60% RH, and these samples are withdrawn periodically and they are evaluated for a minimum time period of 12 months. The samples are also subjected to accelerated stability study. That is, the samples are stored at a temperature of 40 degrees centigrade and a humidity of 75% RH. Samples are then withdrawn periodically from the stability chamber and they are evaluated and the data for minimum 6 months time period is collected and it is recorded and analyzed. What is this intermediate condition? Sometimes it may so happen that the formulation may not be stable at the accelerated conditions of 40 degrees centigrade. For example, creams and lotions which become thermodynamically unstable. In such cases, an intermediate condition is considered and the samples are stored at a temperature of 30 degrees centigrade plus minus 2 degrees and 65% RH. Such samples are withdrawn periodically and a minimum data of 6 months evaluation of the samples has to be submitted to the regulatory agencies of the countries to which the pharmaceutical manufacturer wants to export. Thus, to summarize the ICH guidelines belonging to one particular zone, the stability studies are carried out at conditions of lambient conditions, intermediate conditions, and accelerated stability conditions. Samples are stored at the respective conditions as already discussed. These samples are withdrawn periodically, and the data that is generated by evaluation of these samples that were withdrawn periodically has to be collected, analyzed, evaluated, and formatted and submitted to the regulatory agencies. The purpose of submission to regulatory agencies is to procure a license to export these medicines. Okay. Now, what exactly do we observe for during this withdrawal and analysis? If long-term studies are conducted at 25 degrees centigrade, 60% RH, and significant change is seen at any time during those 6 months or 12 months at the long-term studies or the accelerated storage conditions, sometimes additional testing is carried out at intermediate storage conditions, and then the entire data is evaluated. I told you one simple example where a biphasic system such as a cream or a lotion may fail at accelerated temperatures because of physical instability, but when you consider the long-term data, intermediate data, and the accelerated data together, then it may be considered as stable. Okay, and here the word significant change means the failure to meet the specification. And what is specification? I am sure all of you are aware of what is a finished product specification, specification for the final formulation. So whatever are the specifications, tests and limits laid down in the finished product specification, the product, the formulation should meet the required criteria, and all the tests should give results that lie within the pre-specified or predetermined limits for the minimum time period and over and above that. What is the frequency of testing? As we saw in the previous slide, you have to carry out long-term stability studies, accelerated stability studies, and intermediate stability studies. And we also know that minimum of 12 months data needs to be generated for long-term stability studies. Minimum of 6 months data should be generated for accelerated conditions as well as intermediate conditions. For long-term studies, whenever a sample is placed at 25 degrees centigrade and 60% RH, in the first year of stability study, samples should be withdrawn after every 3 months. So, initial sample, that is 0, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months and 12 months. Samples should be withdrawn and analyzed as per the finished product specification. Subsequently, in the second year, the samples should be withdrawn after every 6 months. Remember, here after 0, 3 and 6, both accelerated and intermediate stability study is complete. Whereas in the second year, it is only the long-term stability study that continues. Samples are withdrawn at the end of 18 months and 24 months. If you are proposing a shelf life that is greater than 2 years, then stability studies continue for the long-term samples, but the samples are then withdrawn after 1 year. So after 24 months, the next sample is withdrawn directly after 36 months and it is analyzed completely as per the protocol that has been laid down. In the previous slide, we saw that a minimum of 6 months data at accelerated storage conditions is sufficient to establish and confirm the stability of the formulation. So the samples are withdrawn at 0, that is initial sample, after 3 months, and the last sample is withdrawn after 6 months. If the samples that are withdrawn at these are stable and found to comply with the limits that are laid down in the finished product specifications, the product can be considered to be stable. However, you need to continue with the long-term stability studies even if the product is proven to be stable by these stability testing. If there is a need to withdraw the samples that are placed at intermediate storage conditions, that is 30 degrees centigrade and 65% RH, then study needs to be carried out over a period of 12 months with the frequency of testing being every 3 months. So sample is evaluated initially, after 6 months, after 9 months and 12 months. It is optional to withdraw a sample at the in the middle at 3 months, and all these samples are then evaluated and analyzed as per the finished product specification. We came across the word significant change in one of the previous slides. Now, what is the significant change? Whenever you are carrying out a stability study and you find that the product does not meet the specifications and limits that are laid down in the finished product specification, then you can say that there is a significant change. Thus, significant change is defined as a 5% change in assay from its initial value. Let us say that when the formulation was manufactured and it was assayed immediately, the assay was 99%. Then there is no significant change at the end of 12 months if the assay value is within 94 to 104% of the drug content. Okay, so 5% change in assay from the initial value and more than 5% indicates significant change. So any drop in assay or an increase in assay may be due to generation of impurities that is beyond 5% of the initial is a significant change. Also, significant change indicates the generation of any degradation products that are greater than the acceptance criterion. All of you know that the limits for impurities and degradation products are very small. They are sometimes as small as 0.01%. So whenever the degradation product or impurity is exceeding this criterion limit that is laid down, that is considered to be a significant change. The third factor which can be called as significant change is failure to meet acceptance criteria for physical parameters including appearance. To give you an example, if there is a suspension initially white in color but later on it becomes a dirty yellow in appearance, this is considered to be a significant change. Change in physical attributes. Let us say initial hardness of the tablets is 10 to 12 kg per centimeter square, but over a period of 6 months it becomes 4 to 5 kg per centimeter square. That's a significant change. Any functionality test such as color, phase separation, phase inversion, resuspendability, very poor resuspendability subsequent to stability studies, caking, hardness, change in hardness of the tablets, dose delivery from the actuated aerosol system, all these and more are considered to be, if there is any significant change in the functionality, this change is considered to be significant. There may be some exceptions such as softening of suppositories, melting of creams which takes place due to aging but does not really hamper with the physical attributes and therefore and can be expected under the accelerated conditions of 40 degrees centigrade and therefore need to be ignored. Okay. The next criterion for significant change is any significant changes in pH beyond the limits, as well as significant change in dissolution values of the dosage units. So if you have individual dosage units such as tablets and capsules, they have a particular limit for dissolution, and if it fails to meet the dissolution criteria, this is also considered to be a significant change. Thus, whenever the pharmaceutical manufacturer carries out stability studies as per ICH guidelines, he has to determine the zone to which he plans to export the drugs, pick up the stability protocol of that relevant to that zone, place samples of the pharmaceutical formulation at long-term stability conditions, accelerated stability conditions, and intermediate stability conditions corresponding to that zone. So he has to keep at particular temperature and RH, monitor them continuously for physical, chemical, and microbiological changes, withdraw samples periodically at 0, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, etc. Carry out complete analysis of the same as per the specification that has been laid down, and determine if there is any significant change in the criterion or the specifications that have been laid down. If the formulation is found to undergo a significant change, as is given in this current slide, that is change in assay or failure to meet acceptance criteria for physical attributes, or changes in pH or changes in the dissolution profile, then further action needs to be taken. What are the actions that need to be taken and how they need to be taken is outside the scope of this chapter. So let us move forward. Coming to the European guidelines, the EMA or the European Medicine Agency's Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, that is CHMP, prepares scientific guidelines in consultation with regulatory authorities in EU member states for the purpose of helping the applicants to prepare marketing authorization applications for human medicines. So the EMA takes the help of the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, which lays down the guidelines that can help all the pharmaceutical manufacturers to submit applications for marketing of human medicines. These guidelines provide a basis for practical harmonization of how the different member states of the European Union and the European Medicinal Agency interpret and apply the detailed requirements for demonstration of quality, safety, and efficacy, which is of foremost importance. Okay, so the European guidelines are laid down by the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, and they help to bring together all these European Union states and harmonize the data so that all these different states countries can export to each other by following these guidelines. There's a set of guidelines which can be categorized as scientific guidelines, quality guidelines, biological guidelines, non-clinical guidelines, clinical efficacy and safety guidelines, multidisciplinary guidelines, and ICH guidelines. So there is a variety of guidelines which are followed and which are acceptable in the different European countries, of which the quality guidelines are related to the stability testing of the various formulations. The quality guidelines that are provided under as the European guidelines for harmonization of the specifications that are used by different countries, European countries, lay down requirements, guidelines, and recommendations for testing and stability evaluation of active substance, recommendations for manufacturing of the excipients and active substances, recommendations for evaluation of impurity levels in the formulations, recommendations, specifications, analytical procedures and procedures for analytical validation, guidelines for evaluation of excipients, guidelines for packaging of the different formulations, guidelines for carrying out stability testing of the formulations, guidelines for carrying out pharmaceutical development, guidelines regards the specific types of products and formulations that can be marketed in the European countries. The guidelines also describe the post-approval change management protocols that need to be followed, as well as the quality guidelines provide for standards for herbal medicinal products that are meant to be manufactured and exported to different European countries. So this is a brief overview of the European guidelines that are applicable to the different countries that come under the umbrella of the EMA. These countries are meant to follow all the guidelines, especially the quality guidelines that are related to quality, safety and efficacy of formulations for human use are laid down under the quality guidelines of the EMA. Coming to WHO, we all know the full form of WHO, that is World Health Organization. It plays a significant role in monitoring the health of the population across the globe, as well as giving recommendations and guidelines to be implemented in case of health emergencies such as pandemics. Who is the WHO? WHO is the directing and coordinating authority for health. It is responsible for providing leadership on global health matters, shaping the health research agenda, setting norms and standards, articulating evidence-based policy options, and providing technical support to countries, as well as monitoring and assessing health trends. Today, WHO is in the limelight as it is playing a very important role in monitoring and assessing health trends that have addressing the concerns that have arisen due to the pandemic. Thus, the WHO is globally directing and coordinating authority which provides leadership on global health matters. It shapes the health research agenda, sets norms and standards, provides evidence-based policy options, and is actively involved in providing technical support to various countries on health issues. The overall objectives of the guidelines that are laid down by WHO are to reduce the health, social and economic burden of communicable diseases, to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis, to prevent and reduce disease, disability and premature death from chronic non-communicable diseases, mental disorders and injuries, to reduce mortality, morbidity and improve health during various stages of life such as pregnancy, childbirth and adolescence, improve sexual and reproductive health. Thus, WHO plays a very important role in managing the concerns of health in countries across the globe, especially in third world countries where guidance and cooperation and direction is needed. WHO promotes health and prevents or reduces risk factors for health conditions associated with the use of tobacco, alcohol, drugs and other psychoactive substances and unsafe sex. WHO helps improve nutrition, food safety and food security throughout the life course and supports public health and sustainable development. WHO plays a very appreciable and admirable role for improving health services through better governance, through financing, staffing and management, and informed, reliable and accessible evidence and research. WHO ensures improved access, quality and use of medical products and technologies. Thus, the beneficial effects of WHO and its role in improving the health of the world has far-reaching implications, and it has been found to improve the health and longevity of life of citizens across the world. The norms and standards for pharmaceuticals that have been developed by WHO and implemented as guidelines are prepared through a vast global consultative process. So WHO consults all its member countries in laying down the guidelines that define the norms and standards. It involves all the member states, and India is one of the member states of WHO, the national regulatory authorities, international agencies, and the WHO expert advisory panel on the international pharmacopoeia and pharmaceutical preparations. It also involves and interacts with specialists from industry, national institutions, NGOs, etc. Thus, WHO is by its very nature an inclusive organization where it involves all its member states in the consultative process. Additionally, it involves the national regulatory authorities, international agencies, the WHO expert advisory panel, experts from the industry, specialists from the industry, institutions of national eminence, NGOs, and so on and so forth, for improving the overall health of the population. The guidelines that are so defined in a consultative manner by consulting the member countries as well as various organizations are evaluated during the meetings of the WHO expert committee on specifications for pharmaceutical preparations, and if found suitable are thereafter adopted as international standards. Thus, there is an overall inclusive consultative procedure that is followed by WHO, wherein it consults its member countries and the various organizations that are involved in pharmaceutical regulations, and it comes up with draft guidelines. These draft guidelines are laid before the WHO expert committee, and if found suitable are then implemented, adapted, and passed on to all the member countries for their guidance and for implementation. Thus, the various regulatory agencies that we saw today and discussed are very much involved in ensuring the safety, efficacy, and quality of pharmaceuticals that reach the patients. The aim of all these regulatory agencies being common to regulate the quality, safety, efficacy, and toxicity of the various formulations, and to ensure that quality medicines reach the end consumer, that is the patient. So you have regulatory agencies in various countries and you have guidelines laid for the ensuring the safety and stability of the formulations. The ICH guidelines are very prominent guidelines that are accepted by all countries across the world, and they have simplified the step of carrying out stability testing by dividing the world into 4 major zones. Depending on the zone to which the medicine is to be exported, the appropriate stability studies are carried out, data is collated and presented to the regulatory agency of that country for approval. WHO lays down guidelines and is responsible for implementation of various standards and maintaining the health and addressing the various health issues of all countries across the world. While laying down the guidelines, it takes into confidence its member countries as well as other regulatory agencies and comes up with different draft guidelines, which are then further converted into international standards. So with this, I have completed the very important topic of regulatory agencies across the world. This chapter does not cover the Indian regulatory agencies, which will be done separately, but you need to know and understand the various guidelines, the various regulatory agencies, and the approaches that are used to improve the overall health as well as economy of each of these countries. So with this, I conclude the topic of drug regulatory agencies. Thank you very much for a patient listening.